Hello, and welcome to Addicted to Murder. This is Courtney, licensed professional counselor with over a decade of experience.
And this is Trisha, and I have never done omophaloscopsis before.
I haven't either, probably.
It's the top word.
Omopholepskis?
It's a really weird. It means gazing at one's belly button while meditating.
Oh, yeah, I have also not done that.
I mean, that just seemed like a kink in the neck would happen with that
Right.
situation.
One would think.
Yeah.
Unless you're, like, actually shaped like the Buddha.
Right. Yeah. We're back.
We are. It's been a while.
Every time we get back together, when it's like a month in between, it takes us a minute to figure out what the hell we're doing. So we're here. We're doing it, though.
Yes, we are.
And we have a new, regular case.
That's right. We're back to our serial killers and not our special holiday episodes.
I did have fun doing those, though.
They were fun.
And this one, hopefully, we'll be able to churn them out every week. If there is a break, apologies. But I'm hoping we'll be able to churn one out every week. I believe it's going to be at least 3, possibly 4. Because it's 2 people.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a team.
Before we talk about our team, I was going to ask you a quick question.
Okay, go for it.
Are you familiar with Winnie the Pooh?
Yes.
Like the universe of Winnie the Pooh
I am
100 Acre Wood?
Yes.
Of the Pooh characters, who do you relate most to?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It's sort of philosophical. Did you ever read The Tao of Pooh?
No.
It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a philosophical, it's been a long time since I read it, but looking at each of those. And Pooh Bear is so accepting of everything and and then moves on and processes stuff really well. And you strive to be Pooh when you read the Tao of Pooh.
Got it. I think that I maybe used to be Eeyore, but I think I'm moving in a Pooh direction.
You think you used to be Eeyore? I love Eeyore, but I just think of Eeyore as being he's thanks for noticing me, and I always think you always smile.
Well, that doesn't necessarily, it hasn't always matched what I felt inside.
Gotcha.
I'd say used to be meaning teenager, 20s, young adulthood.
It's awesome that you're moving to the direction of Pooh.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where we all need to go. I was a Tigger, and I am probably now a Piglet.
Yeah.
So I have a ways to go before I get to Pooh. But I will work on getting to Pooh.
Yeah, I think you're less of a Piglet now than when I first met you.
Maybe I'm going towards Rabbit.
I don't know. Rabbit's not very much fun, and you're very fun.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Rabbit likes to be right.
Mm-hmm.
I used to need to be right. Now I accept that I'm usually not. It's just easier that way. I'm not going to lie. But okay, well, that was my question.
That was a good question. I like that.
Thank you. I actually came up with that on my own instead of Googling, which is my normal take.
Same.
Questions to ask a first date or whatever.
Right.
So we get
to know you questions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Courtney and I are both starting new semesters. I'm looking forward to this semester because the topics are interesting, but one of my classes I'm a little nervous on. I'm doing a whole class on capital punishment, and then my other one is on behavioral pathology, which my main text is the DSM.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So that's a little nerve-wracking, but I'm going to learn a lot. And I think the capital punishment class is just going to be really interesting, and I'm curious on if my stance changes, which currently right now is I'm against it for various reasons, not just moral reasons, but other things. So,
right.
Do you have any interesting classes this semester?
I do. I'm taking a neuroanatomy and behavioral medicine, which might not sound fun to some people, but I'm really excited about.
Okay.
Yeah, just kind of diving in more to the brain and the the anatomy of how the brain works with like different mental illnesses. So
Okay.
I'm excited.
Sort of behavioral pathology related.
A little bit, yeah.
But it probably a more concentrated focus on
Yes.
stuff. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, do you want to talk about anything else before we dive in? Any other updates that you have?
I don't know. Do we have other updates?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so like I said, we're back with an actual serial killer case. And as I said, also, this is a duo, but it's a male-female lover type of serial killer, which I don't believe we've done before. I think our duos have been same-sex and weren't romantic partners. And the book that we're using is The Sunset Murders, the true story of a woman who would do anything for love and the lover who taught her to kill by Louise Farr. So they were known as the Sunset Killers, these two, because who their victims end up being, they tend to find from the Sunset Strip in California.
Makes sense.
As we say California, also all of our thoughts and prayers and all of the things go out to anyone who's there, especially in the Los Angeles area, and all of our first responders, if we have any that listen to us. Thank you so much. That is terrifying what's happening there. I mean, and we're used to forest fires, but they don't typically come into our towns.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And expensive. Courtney, this is a pretty rare serial killer type, don't you think? Like, the female-male lover aspect. Can you tell us anything about couple killers? That might be interesting.
Well, killing partners or teams in general are actually more common than people think, with about 20% of serial killers having a partner that they work with.
Okay.
And so, like you mentioned earlier, these can be romantic or platonic, but in almost all cases, there is a dominant partner, usually the man, who is the one that has the violent fantasies, and then there's a more submissive partner who can be pretty much convinced to go along.
And this will track in this case.
It does.
So I'm going to start with Carol Bundy's story. She is not related to the infamous Ted, but at one point in the book that we read, Ted was being tried or he was convicted or something, and her son was like, "Is that guy related to us?" And she was like, "Hell no, he's not related to us," because they have the same last name. Anyhow. So she was born Carol Mary Peters on August 26, 1942, and she had an older brother named Gene and a younger sister named Vicky. So Carol, of course, had a messed up childhood, as we typically see with our murderers. Her father, Charles, was an alcoholic who moved the family all over the place, depending on where he could find work in a movie theater. So he kind of specifically was in that line of work. Gladys, her mother, was a stand-in for a famous tap dancer named Ruby Keeler, and after that, she became a hairdresser. When Carol was in preschool, the family lived in Los Angeles, and her brother was actually in 14 movies, including a small part in A Miracle on 34th Street, the old one. Gladys was apparently a beautiful woman. Vicky took after her mother in looks. Although a cute baby, Carol grew into an awkward child, and Gladys did not react fondly to what she considered her daughter's shortcomings in the looks department. In fact, when Carol turned 8 years old, Gladys just cut her off. She just pretty much put up a wall and didn't want anything to do with her. During that time, the family was in Louisiana, and Courtney, you know how hot and humid it can get there.
I sure do. I've been there in August.
Yeah. Anyhow, on one particular hot as Hades day, Gladys locked Carol out of the house. Carol was running around, banging on all the doors, trying to get in to escape the sweltering heat, and her mom said, "Go away, little girl. You don't live here. You aren't my little girl." Carol cried and eventually ran 2 miles to where her father worked. Charles brought her home and fought for hours with Gladys over the incident. It was during this incident that Carol decided that she no longer existed for her mother. Courtney?
I mean, this would have been just devastating for Carol. A young girl needs the love and acceptance of her parents, and this type of clear rejection and targeted abuse from her mother, it would be particularly hurtful. And also, at 8 years old, Carol could not have been able to understand or rationalize her mother's actions. Her brain just isn't developed enough for that at that age. And so likely she would have blamed herself and thought that she must have either done something bad or like had something wrong with her in order to be rejected in this way.
For Gladys, does this type of incident look more to the narcissistic discard or the BPD devaluation?
Ooh. You know, I don't know enough about Gladys to be able to speak to that.
Yeah. But something happened.
Something
in her
definitely
mind to
happened.
Where she could just turn that switch and
Right.
be like, you're like dead to me.
Yes, definitely.
Gladys may not have wanted anything to do with her middle child, but her father liked her the best. So even though Gladys didn't like Carol, Charles, she was his favorite. Gene, her brother, never liked Carol. Since the day she was taken home from the hospital and his hand got slammed in the car door, he decided that she was a demon. So into adulthood, he never really got over his dislike for her. He was a jealous, older child. Carol seemed to struggle to remember physical abuse in her childhood, but her sister Vicky later recounted that there were times when Carol would be reading in a chair and her mother would be beating her all over her body and her face with a belt. Per the book. Quote, when it was over, Carol got up and grinned and went to her room. Courtney, that sounds like dissociation. Can dissociation stop people from feeling physical pain?
You know, dissociation is a very powerful tool that the brain uses to cope with trauma. And while dissociated, a person can feel completely disconnected from their body or their consciousness, thus protecting them from experiencing overwhelming physical or emotional pain in order to survive. Now, once the incident's over, there might be lingering pain from any injuries that were sustained during the dissociative episode. But it is effective in the moment at getting through something. And often the person does not remember the traumatic incident that occurred while they were dissociated.
So that makes sense with Carol saying she doesn't remember physical abuse in her childhood. Could have still happened.
Right, exactly.
Charles would use his hand to discipline the children because of this, and perhaps her dissociating when she was beaten by her mother. She felt like she was not abused. Like we just said, Carol was fitted for her first pair of glasses when she was 9. So this made her feel even more unattractive in the eyes of her family. Her hair was brown and her body was kind of plump. The kids at school called her Four Eyes and Miss Encyclopedia because she read a lot. She would read a dictionary for pleasure. All of the kids in this family were considered intelligent. Carol's mother passed away when Carol was 14. She had had a heart attack. The same night that her mother died, Charles decided he needed his young daughters to take their mother's place. Trigger warning, this part involves some sexual abuse. Vicky was the first one to be molested, with her father abusing her orally. Vicky would continue to be abused for many months. As for Carol, Charles told her that she had to take over for her mother now, and then he also abused Carol sexually. Courtney?
You know, as awful and gross as it is, a father using a daughter to take the place of a spouse, both for domestic and sexual roles, is surprisingly common. And it falls squarely in line with that creepy misogyny that leads to men believing that women are property to be used at will, and that they are entitled to have sex with these women whenever they want to. For Carol, it may have also been very confusing to be seen and used in a sexual way after being ignored and put down by her mother. It was wrong, but it also could have felt like being loved and wanted for a change.
Sure. 8 months later, Charles remarried, and the dynamic changed. He began to humiliate Carol by calling her fat and stupid and beating her soundly. One day, Charles sent Carol to the store, and when she returned, the house was empty. Her cat was dead behind the curtains, and her father's shotgun case was empty in the blood-stained living room. Apparently, Charles had planned to kill the whole family, but his wife wrestled him for the gun, and it went off and it shot off his thumb, which was what all that blood was. He was arrested, the wife divorced him, and the girls were put into foster homes. Unpack that, Courtney.
There's a lot there, mostly more questions than anything else. But For Carol, the change in treatment from her father, whom she previously saw as a safe, protective parent, would be another huge betrayal. And how confusing must it have been for her to come home to this scene, but also with the knowledge that her father sent her away, possibly to spare her life.
That's true.
We
I didn't
don't
think
know.
about that.
Why was she the one sent away? But then, as for Charles, I really do wonder what his triggering event was. Right? We talked about family annihilators in our last episode. And this clearly would fit into that category, at least the planned event would have been a family annihilation.
I mean, go Charles' wife for being able to wrestle that gun out of his hands and not let this happen.
Absolutely.
Well, eventually the girls went to their, quote, angry old harridan of a grandmother in Michigan. Before a year occurred, Charles got the girls back after they went to an uncle in Indiana. So he wasn't in jail that long. He drove them back to California. Carol attended 3 different high schools when she was 15 years old. During that time, she began to experiment with sex and the power that she had with sex. She was what was considered a promiscuous girl who would try to get what she needed from her male peers and an occasional bus driver. She dropped out of school her freshman year due to a rumor that she was pregnant, but it was untrue. By that time, Carol had been in 23 schools in 10 years, and she never felt like she fit in. Courtney?
Moving and changing schools so often can have a huge impact on a child's social development. And Carol already didn't have strong attachments to her family members, which, coupled with her physical appearance that led to being bullied, likely made it even harder for her to build positive and lasting friendships. She had learned from her father that the way to feel loved and wanted was through sex, and so that's what she led with to get those needs met.
One day, in front of extended family, Vicky confronted her father about the sexual abuse he had inflicted on the girls. Carol denied everything. She felt dependent on her father and was trying to protect herself. Is this common, Courtney?
It is unfortunately common for abuse victims, particularly child abuse victims, to deny being abused or to minimize or make excuses for an abusive parent. As it is now, according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, only 12% of child sexual abuse is even reported to authorities. And back when Carol was growing up, right, this was the 50s, physical punishment was more accepted. Nobody was talking about sexual abuse. It was very taboo. It wasn't something that, people talked about. And it was even harder to support yourself as a single woman. And so Carol was totally dependent on her father for basic needs. And, in many ways, the devil you know is better than the one you don't.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, and even if 12% is reported, that does not mean that it's confirmed.
Right, or charges are filed.
Yeah,
or
once the kid gets in there to be interviewed or whatnot, they don't necessarily are, make another disclosure.
Right, exactly.
When Carol turned 17, she married a man named Leonard, who was 56. She did this to get away from her father, but this relationship didn't last long. He was a drunk, and per Carol, he wanted her to become a sex worker. Carol admitted that she had done sex work before she met him, but that was probably on her own terms. She next hooked up with 32-year-old Richard Gase, or Geis. Carol was still 17. Richard was a porn writer and had a science fiction magazine called Psychotic. She worked with Richard on a few of her own pieces and even had some stories published. In 1962, her father, Charles, hung himself. Richard felt that Carol blamed herself for this. At this point, since her father was gone, Carol tried to have a relationship with women, but they too hurt her, so she went back to Richard. What she would do was be with a man, and when that man hurt her, she would find a woman. And when that woman hurt her, she would go back to a man. So she would just keep going back and forth. Carol never learned to stand up for herself, and she was known to be obedient. Courtney, what do you think she's doing? Also, she is an adult now, so let's discuss some diagnosis that might be occurring.
Carol probably felt pretty lost without her father. even though he was not a good person or a good dad, for that matter, he was a kind of touchstone in her life. And, it is not that weird for young women who have experienced sexual violence, at the hands of men to try out having relationships with other women who may feel like a safer option. She could have also have been just part of the queer community who was exploring her sexuality as a young person should be doing. Mm-hmm. So, could be pathological, could be totally normal. Kind of depends. But another layer to Carol's behavior is her dependence on other people and relationships for any self-worth or direction in life. So, in addition to what I imagine is very clear post-traumatic stress disorder, I would also guess that Carol had dependent personality disorder. Dependent personality disorder, coincidentally, is a common trait of submissive partners in killing teams.
Research.
Yes.
Helps find statistics.
It does.
Which lends credence to sharing things like that with the world. I'm feeling confident. Sorry, that was a weird tangent. I just went off. Richard and Carol eventually moved to Oregon because, well, so many serial killers seem to come through there at some point. Carol was doing sex work, and one man was a 71-year-old who would pay her in cash, but also as many books as she could haul from his bookstore. I mean, girl's gotta learn. She likes reading. Good escape. They moved back to California, and Carol asked Richard to pay for her nursing school. He agreed, so she got her GED and went to nursing school, where she actually became the class valedictorian. Carol was still fighting her demons. She had swallowed iodine when she was young, and now that she's in her 30s, she's twice more attempted suicide. Anything you want to talk about there, Courtney?
I think just pointing out that victims of child abuse, particularly sexual abuse, are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide at some point in their lives. And those who had a parent die by suicide are 3 times more likely to die by suicide. So Carol having multiple attempts is not surprising.
Yeah. She's got like double stacked against her.
Exactly.
Later on, Carol would marry a man named Grant Bundy, hence her last name, and have 2 sons by him. She was a nurse, and so was he. After several years of marriage, Carol took the boys and left Grant. She liked to be dominated, but only when it was her choice, and it sounds like Grant might have taken things too far. Carol's eyesight continued to worsen throughout her life to the point where she was now nearly blind. She had to quit her job in nursing because she could not see well enough to be competent. She went to a women's shelter for a while and eventually found an apartment to rent where she became friendly with a man by the name of Jack Murray. Carol was also a diabetic. She really had a lot going against her, it seemed. Jack was a handyman at the apartment and also was a bit of a local legend as a singer. Carol, newly separated, alone, and nearly blind with no job, was just the right person for Jack to manipulate. They hung out quite a bit, and Carol opened up to Jack. He thought that maybe she could get disability benefits, and, would she be okay if he helped her make that appointment? Maybe she could also get a second opinion about her eyesight. Perhaps there was something that could be done. All of his attention really got to Carol, and even though Jack was married, she fancied herself in love with Jack. And it was not long before the two entered into an affair that would change Carol. Courtney, it sounds like Carol was a perfect target for being taken advantage of. Anything you want to discuss?
Well, with dependent personality disorder, Carol was easily manipulated and influenced by those who were trying to take care of her. That's what, people with that disorder are searching for. And so Jack was the caretaker that she always wanted and needed, and would have been enamored right away and thus blind to Jack's duplicity.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm just thinking the fact that she's got 2 kids and she has primary custody. Someone with dependent personality disorder, how are they as a parent if they're by themselves? Or how do you think she'd present as a parent? You think those kids could walk all over her?
I don't know for sure.
Okay. It's just a thought. I'm trying to think of how these...
I feel like a conjecture might be that it could become a situation where, children become parentified, and she does depend on her kids to help take care of her a lot. Especially with physical disabilities like blindness, it would be really easy for that dynamic to be created.
Yeah. Carol attempted to keep the affair a secret from her boys, and unfortunately for them, they were now living in a bad neighborhood that was pretty unsafe. So before she divorced her husband, they lived in a nice place. They had nice things, had a good car, blah, 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 blah. When she left, she kind of was kind of in poverty at this point. She had a place to live, but that was about it. Their father worked long hours and on more than one occasion, he would beat the children. And he even gave one of his sons, his name was Chris, a black eye. Jack's wife, Jeanette, at first did not mind her husband being with Carol and helping the, quote, poor blind thing. But after he told his wife that Carol had been a prostitute in Oregon, she changed her tune. She started to notice how clingy Carol was with Jack. Jack was able to help her get that disability and even back pay. Because of his help, Carol was grateful to him, and when he asked her for money, she felt that she owed him that. Carol wanted to marry Jack, and he did the cliche thing that we see. He told her it would happen, but it would be years down the line when both their divorces were final, yada, yada, yada. Until then, could she just help him out here and there? I mean, after all, Jack also did help her find a provider that re-diagnosed her eye condition and determined that it wasn't retinopathy, but cataracts, and she could have a surgery for that. Jack also helped to ensure that she would get $25,000 from the house her ex-husband Grant was selling. So yes, Carol was in love. He did so much for her, and she was closer to him than his own wife was in her mind. Mm-hmm. Carol also had depression that fluctuated with her diabetics ups and downs. She was constantly depressed because Jack did not seem to be doing anything to leave his wife. Carol thought that if she kept buying him gifts, it would entice him to leave. So she did that. She even decided that it would be a good idea to open a joint safety deposit box with Jack and put $13,000 in cash in there. She also lent Jack $10,000 during this time. He told her it was for his wife's cancer treatments. And in an effort to make Jack jealous, she slept with Jack's wife's much younger brother. Carol was livid when she realized that Jack had basically stolen $10,000 from her when she and Jeanette had a confrontation later on. They all stopped pretending, and Carol offered Jeanette $1,500 if she would leave Jack so she could have him. Jack told Carol that he would never leave his wife. So this is like a soap opera, a little bit. There's a lot of manipulation going on both sides. It just seems like Jack is a little better at manipulating than Carol. What do you think, Courtney?
Well, I think what Jack was doing was more calculated and planned and done without much emotion or true care for Carol. What Carol was doing was desperate, reactionary, and done out of love and fear of losing Jack.
Well, by this time, Carol was starting to lose hope of ever getting Jack. Her delusions were fading, and this is about when she meets the real second half of this catastrophic couple. It wasn't Jack. His name is Doug Clark, and we will get into Doug's childhood next time. Courtney?
I think that Carol paints a perfect picture of a submissive, dependent partner looking for someone to tell them how to live, which is probably just what Doug Clark was looking for.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's it for today. Anything else you want to say?
No, I'm excited that we're doing this case. It's like we've got some nice, interesting childhoods and things that are a little different from kind of the ones we've been looking at lately.
Yeah, it's hard to find the childhoods on some of those ones. So getting back to our roots, our serial killer roots.
Exactly.
The addicted to murder roots, where they're addicted to murder, not us. I always have to explain that to people.
Oh, yeah. Serial killers are addicted to murder.
They are. And that has been said. That has been said on multiple, programs I've seen where the psychologists are like, they're addicted.
Right.
So
we might be addicted to true crime reporting.
Learning.
Yes.
Yes. All right, everyone, be safe, and we'll see you hopefully next Tuesday.
All right, bye.
Bye.